When Apple released the first iPhone in 2007, they caught everyone with their pants down, including a little brand from France called Alcatel. Like most phone makers at the time, Alcatel had been pouring all its energy and resources into making dumb phones and flip phones, until Apple came in and gave Alcatel and pretty much every single phone manufacturer out there a little in the Department of Innovation. Everyone rushed into making a phone with a touchscreen, flooding the market with all sorts of wacky experiments. Most of them failed, and at the end everyone adopted the boring-ass slab design we know today. And Alcatel was no different and moved on from making flip phones and started making smartphones with touchscreens. Their first models were pretty bad, but they slowly got better. And then in August 2013 they dropped this little guy, the Alcatel One Touch Pixi Pop 4007A. A mouthful, I know, but it was very cheap. My mom bought one for just $50. When she upgraded, she passed it down to me, and I ended up using it as my main phone twice, in late 2015 and in late 2016. So yeah, I know it quite well. It was in my pocket for quite a while. And over time, it started to hold some sentimental value. Not just because of what I said, but because it was one of the first phones I ever reviewed. Not many people saw that video, but the few who did, let's just say some weren't exactly nice to me. I got dislikes, some in comments, and I panicked. I deleted the video and the entire channel with it. I brought it back in the using Android 2.3 in 2021 video, and ever since it's been sitting in a little bag inside my drawer. Until now, I decided to dust it off to see if it still worked. I charged the battery with my universal charger since the charging port is dead, and when I tried turning it on, nothing happened. I got a bit sad thinking it was completely dead, but I tried other batteries but none of them fit. I was about to give up until I tested the battery of a Galaxy S5 Mini. After a little bit of hand gymnastics, the phone lit up the Alcatel logo. I was so happy to see that because that confirmed it wasn't the phone that was dead, but the battery. I went to a store and bought a battery for $8. It fits perfectly and seems to be the original. The downside is having to charge it with a universal charger every time the battery dies, but overall the battery life is pretty decent. But that's not all. A few years ago I accidentally wrecked the volume buttons with super glue. Now if I want to change the volume, I have to play a video and use the on-screen slider, because there's no option for that in the settings. Oh, that also means I can't access recovery mode. The compromises don't end here. The memory card tray doesn't stay in place, and it often misaligns when I remove the battery. So the phone just stops detecting the SD card. Just one more thing to deal with. The Pixi Pop only has a single core processor, 256 megabytes of RAM, and 512 megabytes of storage. And you're probably like, oh, it's a phone from 2013, what's so unusual about it? The thing is, even by late 2013, this phone was already outdated, especially the operating system, which wasn't from 2013 or 2012, but from 2010. Yes, it runs Android 2.3. The only not so negative thing is that the processor has an ARMv7 architecture, which was far superior than the older ARMv6 one, making it better than 99% of phones that ran Android 2.3. Plastic was the norm for most phones in 2013, and this $50 phone is not the exception. It doesn't feel like the brittle or fragile type, but there are no hollow spots. And for a budget phone from a decade ago, it's fairly well built. Unfortunately, a little bit of the super glue also got to the screen, and I cannot remove it because the screen is plastic, and I don't want to scratch it even more, because scratches, yeah, it has a lot. This is what happens when you use a phone for over 10 years without a screen protector. The screen is very small, just 3.5 inches with a 4:3 aspect ratio and a 480p resolution. The display is pretty bad by today's standards, but if you think this one is bad, it's because you haven't seen the likes of the Galaxy Y and its horrible viewing angles. If you're an older Android user, you're probably thinking, wait, aren't those the capacitor buttons from the whole era? You know, the ones used in Android 4 and up? And you'd be right, those are the Android 4 buttons, except this phone runs Android 2.3. Apparently they plan to update this phone to Android 4 at some point, but either they forgot or just didn't want to, because they never did. So we're stuck with an unsupported version from 15 years ago. And trust me, having Android 4 would have made a massive difference, as you'll see later. To make things a little easier on the eyes, I installed a custom launcher for both functionality and aesthetics, since the stock one is pretty ugly. But a launcher won't fix everything. Like, for example, I still have to deal with a primitive form of multitasking. You know, the one before Android 3. Believe it or not, this phone actually has some useful built-in features that most modern phones don't have. For example, it lets you combine internal and external storage. That means I effectively boosted my total storage capacity from 512 megabytes to 32 gigabytes. So I can move apps to the microSD card and have them read data directly from the card's directory. No need to mess with root apps. Oh, and it also lets you schedule time for the phone to turn off or power back on automatically. That's a feature I really wish my phone had. So does this phone work as a phone, like calls, texts, and so on? Well, not anymore. It only supports 3G, so calls and texts are not a thing. And that's not all. A few years ago it got blacklisted as a reported phone. I don't know how or why, but it's blocked and can't be used for basic calls. So it's a no-no for that. But what about music? There's no Spotify or anything fancy, but you can always use the default player. The speaker is bad. Not the worst I've heard, but still, with decent headphones, it shouldn't be a problem. Though I wouldn't use this thing for music when there are much better offline options. The Play Store, or Android Market as it was called back in the day, stopped working in September 2021. I actually made a video on my channel covering the last day of Google services on Android 2.3. Since the Play Store is useless, I said bye-bye to it to free up some storage. Without the Play Store, I don't have many options to get apps here. As I said before, the port is dead, so I can't transfer files from my computer. So one of the few ways to get apps here is transferring the APK files from my main phone via Bluetooth. But you might be thinking that's not possible. Android doesn't let you share APKs via Bluetooth. And that's true. But I discovered a trick a long time ago that consists of renaming the file extension from .apk to .jpj or .mp4. And that fools the system to accepting any type of file. Let me know in the comments if you know this trick. Since Android 2.3 was discontinued so long ago, pretty much all apps that require an internet connection no longer work. Duolingo, for example, won't even let you log in. I had hopes it would still work, since I had so much fun playing this game back in 2015, even though I didn't learn much from it. The same goes for WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, or any type of messaging app. The only thing that got close to working was Facebook. Yeah, for some reason you can still log in on Facebook Lite. Notifications from friends and activities still work. And most surprisingly, you can still post things. I uploaded a random photo from the gallery and it worked. But there's one tiny detail, there's no feed. Yeah, it'll always be empty. And for messaging, you get this thing prompting you to update to Android 5. So you can barely do anything. Maybe the late 2020 version still works, which I did get straight from the Play Store right before the end of support. But my SD card went corrupt and I lost the APK. And I literally couldn't find that damn APK anywhere, and now it's just lost media. The version you see me using here is from 2018, the most recent one I was able to find. Since Facebook Lite is pretty much useless, I tried to make it work on Opera Mini. Sadly, it doesn't work. It loads a broken page that prompts you to update the browser. It gives you the option to download an APK apparently made for Android 2.3, but it doesn't work. And it's not that the APK is broken, it's just that you need at least Android 4 to install it. But I wasn't done yet. My last hope was Firefox. And surprisingly, it does load the homepage without the update message. But when you try to log in, this happens. This is 100% due to the lack of RAM. I tested this website on a high-end Android 2.3 phone with a dual-core processor and 1GB of RAM, and it was able to open Facebook perfectly. The same story goes for Instagram, which requires at least Android 4, so you now understand why I said this phone never getting Android 4 was gonna be such a bummer. And call me crazy for saying this, but this phone is even more useless for social media than my 2009 Nokia 5130. Which still lets you use Facebook, so for social media this phone gets a big F. I tried a web browser on this thing, and Opera Mini still lets you visit most text-based sites. For example, you can easily look up something on Wikipedia or read the news. but this time even Opera Mini couldn't save this phone from being obsolete. Complex sites like Apple.com failed to load at first, but by the third refresh we managed to load something. However, there's a video site that's apparently the 25th most visited website worldwide that still fully works here, but I won't say the name of the site for reasons. I found even movies uploaded here, and they're perfectly playable on this phone. You could even download them if you wanted to. And here on this site I found one of the few ways, if not the only way, to adjust the volume. That gave me some hope that YouTube might still work, but if you didn't have enough of the update 204 message, here goes again. But watching YouTube on Android 2.3 is still possible. Not on this phone, sadly. It doesn't work on phones with less than 512 megabytes of RAM. How do I know that? My 2011 Motorola Droid Bionic with its powerful NVIDIA Tegra 2 and 1GB of RAM can still play YouTube videos through Firefox. But if you want to see what happens when I try to load YouTube on this phone, it just crashes instantly, as you can see. So it's impossible, unfortunately. Or maybe not. Through a site spelled youtube.be, which is basically YouTube spelled differently, you can access YouTube and download videos. The problem is when you type something in Opera Mini and it does nothing. It's broken, limiting you to trending content, but with Firefox you can search whatever you want. But here's the thing, it crashes when you try to open a video. So the only workaround is to copy the link, head to Opera Mini, paste the link and download the video. It's a lot of work, I know, but it's better than nothing. But I still had one trick up my sleeve, or that's what I thought. I wanted to modify the build.prop file to trick the system into thinking I had Android 5 or 6 to be able to use YouTube and other services. But that requires super user access, which I had when I rooted my phone back in 2015. But that's where I was wrong. When editing the file, my file manager failed to overwrite the text. I didn't understand what was happening, but it turns out the app granting super user access, which is by Baidu, no longer works. Somehow the app only works when you have internet access, and the thing is their server is dead. And while it technically still have super user access, I can't do anything. I even updated the app to the latest version for Android 2.3, but same result. It's so sad because TubeMate, an app to watch YouTube videos, could have worked. But you get the update to Android 4 thingy. The search suggestions still work, so it's a bummer it doesn't work. However, you're probably gonna be surprised to see that this app still works. Yeah, it's Google Maps, and even the location services still work. So if you get lost and only have this thing to find your way home, sigh in relief because this phone has you covered. The functionality is almost 100% well preserved, except for Street View. And that's because in the OG days of Android, Street View was a separate app. I never understood why they did that, since even on Symbian, the main app had that functionality built in. The phone's only camera has a VGA resolution. To be honest, the selfie camera on my 2007 Nokia 6120 took better pictures than this phone's main camera. Photos are very blurry even in broad daylight. The same goes for videos, they're extremely blurry and shaky. The perfect camera for capturing UFO sightings. In low light conditions, the results speak for themselves for both photos and videos. The quality is just terrible, and it wasn't even that dark. So this is pretty much the definition of a potato camera. If you're my age, you probably remember Flappy Bird. The game was about making this bird flap through the middle of the pipes without crashing into them to score points. Pipes that have nothing to do with the pipes of the game of a certain Italian plumber. Wink wink. My personal record is 50 points, though not on this phone. Leave yours in the comments because if you type the button to see other people's high scores, it kicks you out of the app. One of my favorite games was Boson X, where you help a professor search for exotic physics particles. It's a short but fun game, and surprisingly it's still available on the Play Store many years later. Fortunately, it's not the case of another game I was addicted to back in the day, which was Puppet War FPS, where you play as a janitor who, with the help of his mop, has to save the world from evil puppets, who are trying to enslave humanity. It's been over 10 years since I last touched this game, and it's still fun as hell to beat up Kermit's cousins. And listening to the tune sound effects brings me back in time. Going for more demanding games, we have Minecraft in its last version for Android 2.3, which was also the last one I played before quitting the game. and that was version 0.14, which already implemented things like the Nether. I don't know about you, but I loved playing this version. It was portable, simple, and fast. Only 14 megabytes and could run on a toaster. I used to play it with my cousins and younger siblings, and it was a blast. Unlike Mario Minecraft, which takes forever just to make it to the main menu. Then we have Resident Evil 4 for Android, a game I actually completed on this phone. It runs perfectly and is super fun. Don't expect PS2 level cinematics, it's all text, but Capcom did a great job given the limitations of 2010 phones. What I found crazy is that the phone doesn't heat up at all with any of the games or apps I tested. I could play games for hours and it remains at room temperature. To push the phone even further beyond, we have GTA 3, and the fact that the game works at all is incredible to me. Performance is very good, though it's not perfect. Since I wasn't able to get the game from the Play Store, I had to install version 1.3, and the game data for this processor, in this case MediaTek. But I wasn't done with this phone yet, and I tried Vice City, and I was so excited to see the phone load in the first cutscene of the game. But the excitement turned to disappointment after you discover that there's a glitch that makes it impossible to make it past the main menu. Or so I thought, because I discovered that by clicking really fast you can make it past it. And then I was like, finally it worked. But nope, I get stuck loading the game right at the end. So Minecraft and GTA 3 are the most demanding Android games I got running on this phone. For emulators though, this is where it shines. First I tested the SNES emulator, and I realized you can play almost anything without any slowdown, even at double the resolution. I tested Inspector Gadget, a game from my childhood, and it's playable, except for how tough it was to play behind the camera with these controls. And what I found funny is the vibration motor blasting at full volume every time I press something. But does it run Doom? And yes, it does. Doom does work, but it's very hard to play here. After my little experience dealing with this tiny screen, I tried connecting my PS4 controller, but it wouldn't sync. I would always get an error. Moving up a generation, we have the Nintendo 64. Thanks to the N64 emulator, you can play almost any game. I know that for a fact, since I completed Mario 64 on this phone in 2016, when my LG G4 was broken. But this small screen adds unnecessary difficulty. Zelda Ocarina of Time runs pretty well, but I can see it struggles a bit more with this game, since frame drops are the norm in some areas. Still, it's perfectly playable in my opinion. I got the sword, bought the shield, and reached the Deku Tree, so it's possible to complete this game on this phone. I also tested GoldenEye 64, which is extremely difficult to play, not because of lagginess, but due to how bad it is to play on this tiny screen. Just making it to the first tunnel was nearly impossible. With the N64's rival, the PlayStation, it's a similar story. Most games are playable with the PSXE emulator version 1.5, as version 2.x doesn't work, and I went straight for one of the most demanding games, Crash Bandicoot 3. I thought there's no way the single-core brain inside would be able to handle it, but oh man, I was wrong. Performance is very good, even with the sound effects on max, which usually demand more resources. Then there's Resident Evil 3, which I played using the FPSC emulator, and it runs great too. It's playable on both EPSXE and FPSC in terms of performance, and completing the game on this one would be a great challenge, as you can press two buttons on the same side simultaneously for some reason, making even running hard. If only the PS4 controller worked, it would have been a different story. Moving a few years forward, we have the Nintendo DS and PSP, both from 2004. And guess what happened with the Nintendo DS? It didn't work. Nah, just kidding. After freeing up some space, most games I tested were playable with frame skipping on 2. I didn't expect any game to run at all, but as you can see, WWE is perfectly playable. But I got my ass kicked for playing behind the camera on such a small screen. I also tested Metroid, and you can see the phone struggling to move it, more than the fighting game. But it's still playable, which is impressive. I expected it to be painfully slow and pretty much unplayable, but again, the single-core ARM-V7 processor turned out to be much more powerful than I thought. So this old phone gave us a big surprise by emulating the Nintendo DS. So I went for the PSP, which is in a whole different league. But when I opened the emulator, I got an error message. Totally expected given the phone's limitations. This phone is nearly unusable if you want to browse the web or use apps that need internet connection. So the only use for it is listening to music, playing old games, and emulating old consoles. Challenging yourself to see if you can complete games on a tiny screen while reliving old times. Even though the processor was not as weak as I thought, coming really close to gaming phones from around the same time like the Xperia Play, it still falls into the dark category of obsolete. And looking at it in perspective, this phone was much better than many options at the time. The Galaxy Ace or Galaxy Y, for example, were not only older at that point, but way more expensive and offered worse performance. If I were in 2013, the Alcatel Pixi would have been a solid buy for just $50. If only it had Android 4, it would have been a different story. Anyway, I hope you guys liked the video and I'll see you guys later. Bye.